So welcome. We are in October now, and I've been steadily moving, ahead with my look at this year at the evolution of those monster archetypes. So just to set the stage briefly again, I know you all here know that what I've been doing, but last year I looked at the the history of like the origins, where it came from culturally and literarily, of these three major monster archetypes: Dracula, Frankenstein, and the Wolfman. And we started out by looking at cultural tensions, the French Revolution, all these kinds of things that built up. Of course, we spent a great deal of time on that magical weekend in the Swiss mountains there with Lord Byron, Mary Shelley, and Percy Shelley, and John Polidori as well, where all these kind of stories came about. And we talked, of course, about Mary Shelley's Frankenstein ad nauseum, not ad nauseum, but at length. Bram Stoker's Dracula and Robert Louis Stevenson's Dr. Jekyll, Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, which is where the duality of man concept starts from. And in the Wolfman, uh, you had some werewolf stories. We talked about Guy Endor's Werewolf of Paris, which really started out this idea. And then, of course, 1941's Universal's The Wolfman really took the idea of the werewolf, which sometimes was a part of the vampire mythos, certainly part of the Dracula mythos, but it has its own. It's actually the oldest of the in terms of like folk beliefs. The werewolf is the oldest of the three because it dates back to like ancient witch trials. It was kind of part of that thing. If you made a deal with the devil, you change yourself into a wolf and um, terrorize the village and your enemies and so forth. So they took that old folk legend and really kind of blended it with Jekyll and Hyde and made it this beautiful thing that it is, which has become such a great archetype. The even a man who's pure of heart and says his prayers by night can become a wolf when the wolfbane blooms and the autumn moon is bright. So that was really great. So we talked about that last year, and then this year so far we've been going through the evolution of those archetypes in our popular media, particularly in films, but we will mention books when something comes out. But again, I'm looking at the specific archetypes too. So, vampires, for example, there's so many vampires stories have just branched out to be so many different things. And right now, anyway, I'm trying to stay centered on Dracula centric stories. So that's what we're doing for that. Because yeah, vampires are Frankenstein pretty much is always Frankenstein. Of course, you could branch out to zombies in general. Frankenstein's not really a zombie. I mean, you could make the argument that he is a dead corpse risen back to life, but he's more than that. He's not. He's a new life. He's not a. He's not a walking dead. He's been granted a resurrection of sorts, but he's not a human being that was dead and is now alive. He's an amalgamation of old body parts into this new creation thing. This new being. So it's its own fascinating thing. And then the Wolfman, of course, you can broaden that out to just about werewolf stories in general, because that, there's no one. I mean, Lawrence Talbot, what a great character he is, but he didn't, survive as the only, werewolf that was being told, stories that were being told about, for a long time. So, well, they are the most seminal archetypes, right? I mean, they are the most three seminal monster archetypes we can think about. Oha says, would Frankenstein count as a golem? The golem is certainly a part of the historical DNA of Frankenstein, but he himself isn't a golem. I think the golem has to be, strictly speaking, it's the being that's called forth to defend the Jewish people, in Jewish mysticism. It's not part of like the actual Talmud or anything like that, but it's in Jewish mysticism and mystic texts. It was there, and that's what the great, German silent film, the Golem, as he came to be, the movie that was created there. And we talked about those movies. Actually, you can go back and look at my playlist from last year. I need to add all the videos I've been doing this year to that playlist, but we talked about the one surviving movie, the Golem as he came to be, but there were two Golem films he did before that. So it was actually the end of a trilogy, because sadly so many of those great silent films are lost to us. But yeah, he's certainly part, because it's a creation of a being, so it's certainly in the DNA of his history. Definitely. Oh, no, this is Germany here. Gotcha. Yeah, I'm really bad at counting time zones. I can't tell which region you are just by what time it is. That's my dyscalculia. Yeah, Probably not even that. I'm just bad at math on top of dyscalculia. So anyway, um, before I get though, last we left off with talking about Hammer horror's initial The Curse of Frankenstein and the horror of Dracula, because that was the next big step. We started out, of course, looking at the Universal movies and the what they how they established these monsters in the popular consciousness. And honestly, even though at some point we got to move on from the Universal monster movies, but you always come back to the Universal monster movies. I mean, those thumbnails. I was just been telling Chat GPT like last week. I said, "Show me a picture of Dracula, Frankenstein, and the werewolf playing a video game." And that's what it popped up. And if you look at that picture from last week, or even the thumbnail from this week, I didn't specify which Dracula, which Frankenstein, but it gives you the Boris Karloff Frankenstein, the Bela Lugosi Dracula. It doesn't give you a Hammer horror version of those characters. Now, that's not to degrade Hammer horror's importance to the archetypes at all. That's why we're spending so much time on them, because they had an important effect on it too, and it's an important place in the history of the evolution of these archetypes. But it's always good to keep going back to the universals, because yeah, that's it. I've mentioned this a lot, but I keep bringing it up because I think it's so fascinating that it was the late 90s, maybe early 2000, or no, it was late 90s, but Burger King, for no reason at all, did a Halloween themed kids meal with the Universal monsters. Uh, and I've got the figures. I got them in the other room, but yeah, I've showed them off before. I've got the little Dracula that pops out of a coffin, which is the Bela Lugosi Dracula. I've got the Frankenstein. It comes out of this wooden box, and the werewolf and the creature from the Black Lagoon. And think about that. Late 90s, at the end of the century, these monsters were still recognizable enough and relevant enough, and kids were interested in them enough for them to suddenly be toys in a kids meal without any accompanying film. It wasn't like the Monster Squad, that was in the 80s, but it wasn't like a movie like that had come out, and these were tie-ins or anything. Just boom, because we just love these characters. We know these characters. There were the Universal Monster cookies. You can look a lot of the 90s. If you look at Pepsi and Doritos, they had a whole, it's famous now because it was just such a fun campaign they did back in the day, but you can look in the commercials. I think this was 90s. It maybe did it a little bit into the aughts, but a whole, ad campaign with these monsters too. And I think that was a tie into Universal Studios with their horror nights or whatever. But but it's just fascinating to me. And now Universal Studios is finally given the monsters their due and created their Universal Monster Land or whatever. I haven't been yet, and I haven't looked into it too thoroughly. I saw you guys talking about some of the things they've changed, and I know they've changed some things, like your Dr. Frankenstein at this point is of course a woman who's a descendant from Victor Frankenstein. Um, I don't like changes like that at all. They're classic for a reason. They don't need to be adapted. Just nut up and give us the real deal. Like I hate this little concessions. I hate that. I absolutely hate that. Stop changing it. They survive for a reason. There's nothing racist about them. There's nothing sexist about them. They survived in the popular consciousness for a reason. And one of the reasons we don't get as much great content from them today, like all these things I'm listing off from the 90s, one of the reasons we don't get that today is because this cultural insecurity, "Oh, we gotta update, we gotta change, we can't offend," it's, shut up, just put it out there as it is.